as chairman.
Good evening. We are calling to order this meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board for the 26th of March. We begin, as always, with our agenda. Does anyone have any changes to the agenda you would like to mention? If not, I would entertain a motion to adopt our agenda.
I'll make a motion to adopt tonight's agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of adopting the agenda say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. That motion carries unanimously. We have minutes from a meeting of February 26th, the regular meeting. We did not have a work session in the month of February. Once again, if anyone has any amendments, changes, or edits to these minutes, please let me know. Otherwise, we would be looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor of approving the minutes for February 26th, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. That motion also carries unanimously. The next section of our agenda is for those cases that come before us, rezonings or otherwise, that are involving public hearings. I would usually read off the rules involving a public hearing, but being that there are no public hearings this evening, I'm going to skip with those rules and go directly to our next section, which is how we handle cases that do not have a public hearing. We have two of those this evening. We'll hear those cases explained to us by our staff members, then we will hear from the applicant, and after the applicant is finished, we will have the opportunity as a board to ask questions of both the staff and the applicant, and then we will make a decision and discuss the case by itself without any involvement from the public that's not in attendance anyway. Okay, so we will start with our first case, which is 17 REZ 19. Scott Ramage is here to present it to us. Good evening.
Good evening. All right, this case is a rezoning request for two properties totaling about 3.24 acres near Mayfair Shopping Center in central Cary. The site's on the north side of Southwest Maynard Road, immediately west of the Mayfair Shopping Center. And this perspective aerial view is looking north. On the site you can see is immediately behind the Brugger's bagel shop on Maynard. And the site backs up to the Rose Street Park, which is colored in the distance. The site is actually currently split zoned, with 2.78 acres of the site zoned General Commercial District and 0.45 acres zoned R12. The R12 portion that you see in the upper left of the site boundary is about a third-acre lot that does not have direct frontage onto Gordon Street, but is at the end of it. The other R12 portion is in the lower left of the site, and it's a 5,000 square foot R12 remnant from a subdivision that happened some time back. The applicant's rezoning requests consists of the following. First, he proposes to extend the general commercial zoning onto the vacant R12 lot at the end of Gordon Street, as such. Second, he proposed extending the GC zoning onto that small 5,000 square foot remnant on Maynard, there. And finally, the applicant proposes adding conditions over the entire assemblage. The proposed conditions include some, actually, let me go back a slide right now. So as we look at the site, the proposed conditions include first some setback conditions, and secondly some use conditions. The setback conditions, if you see the lot in the upper left of the site. For any properties adjacent to that lot, the applicant is offering a minimum 60-foot setback across the northern property line and a minimum 70-foot setback across the western property line. For the larger parcel that you see the majority of the site, so it's the rest of all of this, any part of this property that's adjacent to any residential lot would have a minimum 50-foot setback. So those are the setback conditions. The other conditions have to do with excluding uses that are otherwise permitted by right in the general commercial zoning district. So this slide lists most of the major uses that are allowed by right in the GC district. And the applicant is proposing to prohibit 4 types of uses that are shown here struck out, namely kennels, either indoor or outdoor, veterinary offices that have outdoor kennels, nightclubs and bars, whether they have indoor or outdoor facilities, and lastly, hotels and motels. Staff has evaluated the case according to the future growth framework in the Cary community plan and according to the policies in the plan, but we'll take a look at the future growth framework first. According to the future growth framework map, the adjacent neighborhood, as well as a small portion of the site itself, is designated as heritage neighborhood. And generally, heritage neighborhoods encompass the original core neighborhoods of Cary. There's a wide variety of lot sizes ranging anywhere from quarter-acre to half-acre lots, homes typically built in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. The majority of the site is in a commercial center mixed-use future growth framework designation. Commercial mixed-use centers are intended to be compact, walkable mixed-use centers with a mix of commercial, shopping, office space, residential space, and so forth, and maybe 4 to 5 stories tall. In terms of conformance, and we'll go back and talk about the neighborhood. In terms of conformance with the heritage neighborhoods designation, the proposed rezoning would remove that one single vacant 1/3 acre lot that's at the end of the street, of Gordon Street. However, it doesn't have any connection. There's no frontage onto Gordon Street. Gordon Street ends before you get to the site right now. So it doesn't feel like it's part of the neighborhood, and it wouldn't feel like it would have an impact of actually removing a house or property from the neighborhood. In terms of conformance with the commercial mixed use designation on the balance of the site, well, it's kind of impossible to tell whether development under either the existing or the proposed GC zoning will further the vision for the plan. They both provide commercial uses. Commercial uses are fine to have in a commercial mixed-use center. But regardless of all that, the first thing that we wanted to point out and that we kind of lead with in the staff report is a kind of an analysis of the very small magnitude of this proposed rezoning request. So first let's look at the total area. The total area being requested to be rezoned from R12 to GC is only about 14% of this total site. And again, it's a 1/3 acre lot and then a 5,000 square foot remnant. But the more interesting finding that we detailed in your staff report is that the gain with this rezoning in any actual buildable area is very, very small. If you look at the white text bullets in the center of the slide, if this site is rezoned and if it's built someday for a commercial, retail, or shopping use, the total gain in actual buildable area is only about 1,880 square feet. It's very small. If the site was used for future office use under the zoning, again, the gain in total buildable area is very small, only about 2,700 square feet. And this happens because under the LDO, we require stringent buffers between a single-family detached neighborhood and either office or retail uses. And in the event, that will take up a good portion of this area being rezoned. But the rezoning will create a more regularly shaped general commercial site, and that will help the marketability of the site. So in the staff report, we first examined the policies you see on this slide, which kind of now look from the policy angle about how does this rezoning stack up against our vision for shopping centers, these commercial mixed-use areas, because that's the majority of the site. So in the shop chapter, we do talk about facilitating redevelopment of underperforming centers, and parts of Mayfair are an aging center. As the applicant will indicate when he speaks later this evening, unfortunately, those aren't under the control of the applicant. The balance of the center, this is a greenfield site we're talking about tonight. The rest of Mayfair Plaza that's developed, that is currently developed, is not under his ownership or control, and he will be talking a little bit later about the outreach that he's attempted trying to see what can be done. In the shape chapter, we have a policy that says, well, we really would like to encourage mixed-use development. With GC zoning, you can have a mix of office and retail uses, so that's not impossible to have some kind of a mix on the site, but it's not required. At the same time, most of the sites zone GC today, and it's not required to have any mixing there, but you could if you want. And in the shape chapter, we also have a policy talking about supporting infill and redevelopment. This is clearly an infill site. It's a little vacant 2.78 acre general commercial site that's never been built, and rezoning the site so it's all under one consistent zoning may make the site more feasible to be marketed, which could help this finally get developed as an infill property. The other set of policies we looked at in the community plan have to do with the neighborhood side of things. To what extent does the proposed rezoning conform with maintaining the character of the adjacent neighborhood and provide appropriate transitions between whatever would be built here in the neighborhood. And in that side, in their staff report, we pointed out again the depth of the buffers that would be required under the LDO, and the required buffers, the setbacks from the buffers, the proposed setbacks given as a zoning condition. When you couple those with removing some of the uses that the neighborhood asked the applicant to remove, that should help maintain the character. We should have an adequate transition between whatever gets developed on the site and the adjacent neighborhood, and the uses have been negotiated so that they're acceptable to the neighborhood. When we look at stream buffers and floodways on the site, town's GIS mapping indicates the site is largely free of regulatory stream buffers. However, of course, on-site determination required to find out if there's any wetlands. We already noted that on the Parks Master Plan, Rose Street Park is immediately north of the site. There are no planned future greenways or street side trails in this area. We already have on-street sidewalks on both sides of Maynard. The location is great for transit. We have two Go Cary bus routes on Maynard, Go Cary route on Kildare Farm Road, and Triangle Transit. Go Triangle has another route that operates adjacent to the site, so very well served in transit. In terms of roads, Southwest Maynard is at its full cross-section. It's already a 4-lane or 5-lane road section. Kildare Farm Road, all the roads in this area, all the thoroughfares are at their full planned width, so there are no changes there. 2 neighborhood meetings were held prior to the council public hearing for this case. The first meeting was held on June 7th. At that time, the rezoning only proposed, the applicant only proposed to rezone that 1/3 acre R12 lot at the end of Gordon Street. Based on discussions with the neighbors at that meeting, the applicant decided to also include the rest of the site so that conditions could be offered over the whole package, because the neighbors asked questions about removing some uses, such as kennels without, vets that had outdoor kennels and so forth. So at the December 6th meeting, basically what was presented to the neighborhood is exactly what you've seen tonight. Neighborhood feedback, and some neighbors still had questions about road connections in the future, about what the actual ultimate use of the property could end up being, and of course, questions about stormwater, which are very typical to hear in any site in town. At the public hearing on January 25th, no citizens spoke, so there's nothing to report on that score. Now, for the staff recommendation. Considering the case on balance, staff finds the rezoning to be consistent with the Imagine Cary Community Plan based on the key observations that we've shown in that bullet list. First, we feel the zoning change is so slight and that both the existing and the proposed zoning both are roughly equally compatible with the future growth framework. And we think this is kind of reinforced by the study shown in the staff report that the actual change in buildable area hardly changes with the rezoning. So again, the changes are very slight. It's hard to find that one is better than the other. under future growth framework. Next, the transitions, buffers, and usage exclusions that are proposed under conditions should help make this a fairly compatible rezoning for the neighbors, for the adjacent neighborhood. Commercial uses are allowed in GC, and in a commercial mixed-use center, you would expect to find commercial uses, and office uses are allowed in GC as they would still be here. And lastly, and this may be one of the most significant things here, is that the site has sat undeveloped for 40 years or more. The site has been there as a very difficult to develop and assemble infill site. The applicants tried to pair it up with that R12 lot to bring it in and kind of create a more regularly shaped property under single zoning where it's all GCCU, so that perhaps in the future we can actually see this infill part of Cary get developed. And based on those findings, staff's preliminary recommendation is for approval of this rezoning request. And with that, I'll ask the applicant, Mr. Doug Ledson, who is here tonight, to come forward and share his thoughts with you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Doug Ledson. I don't know if you'd recall, some of you anyway, about 2 years ago when I did this. At that time, we had, it was my earnest effort to come up with something the neighbors wanted, which we came up with. As some of the faces are the same, but some have changed. And with that, we moved forward. However, the town council found that an unacceptable use. So because of that, we kind of went back to the drawing board. And then we had a year wait. So it's now been, I guess, I don't know if it's been right at 2 years or a little over 2 years, and here we are again. So what we're dealing with is 1/3 of an acre that we're really trying to get rezoned that doesn't fit in any other way. We sat down with the neighbors. I said, look, we're not, they still want that thing that the town council doesn't want. And those that were at the meeting with the staff would concur with that. And we just said, it's off the table. So I said, so let's go another direction. What do you find unacceptable? So with that, we came up with 4 uses that to them were totally unacceptable. So I said, okay, we're good on that. I said, what other issues do we have? Well, we don't want the building too far, too close, and I do want to clarify one thing on this, and maybe it was my error. Well, first, I provided a larger setback than be required for O&I, if it goes that direction. And I was fine with that, neighbors were good with that. When we did get done with them, towards the end of the meeting, the neighbors expressed their concern of, well, what about the rest of the property? That's the bigger piece of the property. You've got the ability to do those things that we really don't want. So I said, yeah, but we're only going for 1/3 of an acre. Anyway, they expressed a lot of concern about that. After that meeting, planning said that they had had a lot of communications and the neighbors were really, really concerned about those restrictions not going on the larger parcel. So with that, I relented and I said, all right, let's just put it on the whole parcel. And what we discovered was ordinances didn't allow it. So then that's why we ended up having a second meeting, but that was only after the ordinances were changed, and I think this board ended up being involved in those changes of the ordinances. Otherwise, what it did is, without having to go through a complete rezoning, I could just put restrictions on one parcel into an adjacent, as long as the parcel is adjacent to it. So what I did was I extended those restrictions to the larger parcel, which right now I can build anything that GC allows, and which is what the neighbors were concerned about. So we alleviated that concern, that's why they didn't get up. But then I did one other thing, and I just added this on, and as I said, this might have been my error, is that the staff shows it as a 50-foot setback, but that's on the northern properties. I extended the 60-foot for the other one that was in the Gordon Street parcel to the other residential owners on the north side, because it's going to be a consistent 60-foot line rather than the 50-foot line. So what that does is that reduce the O&I square footage by 2,000 square feet. So in reality, the O&I, if it goes O&I, it's going to be less than 1,000 square feet that I'm going to be adding. I mean, I don't know how many people go through rezoning where they're restricting it so much that you're getting almost no use. But nonetheless, it squares off the property. There's a lot of benefits to it, that we see on moving something forward. If it doesn't, then of course, what we're going to have to do is just move forward with what we have, make that lot a buffer, and that's it. But the other neighbors to the north are not going to have the 60-foot that I gave them, and they didn't ask for it. In addition, they're not going to have the restricted use on the larger parcel. So I'm trying to come up with something that's a win-win for everybody. I think we've done it, and we have one council member that was pretty insistent on, we need to do a redevelopment. Now, that sounds great. Everybody would love to see it. Wouldn't we like to see something like North Hills happen right here? One, the property is too small. Two, you have to have all the property owners agreeing to it. Mayfair Plaza, the owner of Mayfair Plaza, has said, why? I don't have any interest in it. I've got leases for over 20 years. We're doing no redevelopment. So, as Scott said, I have no control over those property owners. Bruegger's Bagels, they're happy with where they're at. The only person that had an interest in moving forward was the owner of that tin building that's, has a frontage. He's got a half an acre. He wants $1 million. Well, if we're looking at those valuations, mine should be worth $6.5 million. If I could get 25% of that, that property would be gone. So it was just totally unreasonable. And I just said, look, nobody can get those numbers to work. He said, well, that's what, I look at the rental income I get off of that thing, and I needed something comparable. Bottom line, it's not feasible. So I've contacted everybody. I've had so many meetings over the years. The neighbors will tell you, the reason why they don't get up is that there's no need to. We've discussed this thing, and they know I've been over backwards. And it's for such, it's going to be less than 1,000 square foot if it goes O&I of additional footage. So with that, I'm hoping that you'll see the reasoning for this, and I look for your support.
Thank you. Open up the floor to questions of the applicant or the staff. We'll start over here with Ms. McFarland.
Sure, thank you. I guess for staff, just a couple quick questions on the site. As I look at the site, and I was on the board when it came before us before, and question I have is, what are the access points to the site? Would Gordon Street be the access point, in addition to if some sort of access could be created at the intersection there at Southwest Maynard?
I may ask Ken Dunn to come down and help address this. Clearly, the main entrance, where there's a signal light at Kilmaine and Maynard, that would probably be the likely access from Maynard into the site.
Okay.
I've walked the site on Gordon Street. It looks like the pavement goes just about to the end of the two properties here. It is not, I did not see it signed for future connection, but the normal process is to extend it into the site. And I may ask Ken to elaborate on that.
Yeah, we'd review that at development plan to determine exactly where that stops, and also look at the connection at Maynard as well at that time.
Okay. All right. So it is, at the time of a site plan review, it would be potentially Gordon Street would be one mean of access as well as on Maynard there. And it was more just for my own curiosity and also just looking to see the buffers between O&I and then retail and interesting geometry of just that access point to get back into what would be the developable area. But those are my only those are my questions I had just on that. Thanks.
I'm good, no questions.
I have a few.
Mr. Image, the residential parcel to the north, I think you alluded to a third of an acre lot.
This one, right?
Yes, correct. There doesn't appear to be any road frontage on Gordon Street.
Correct.
If the owner were to want to place a house on that today, how would they go about ensuring connectivity? It doesn't appear that there's any way that they could link to any roads.
I will ask Ken. Someday on
He took an hour to think of that question.
Again, we'd have to look at it at development plan. My assumption would be that Gordon Street would have to extend.
Okay, but it would
Get
be
something there.
developable. I mean, the owner wouldn't be in a situation where they could not develop because they don't have road access, correct?
No. that wouldn't
Okay.
be the case.
My other question, Mr. Amage, I guess is more for you. The setbacks, what are so the applicant has requested additional setbacks to both the north and western property lines. What are the LDO setbacks required?
Well, there's setbacks, and then there's the buffers.
Specifically the building setbacks. Is
Okay.
what I'm interested in.
Well, in this case, because you'd have two different uses. So this site gets developed, say, with a retail store next to the single-family lots back here. First, you'd have a perimeter buffer, in that case, 65 feet, type A opaque perimeter buffer. Off of the buffer, if it's a fully wooded site, you have another 10-foot, you have a 10-foot setback off of the buffer to protect the root zones and so forth. So you can't bring a parking lot all the way up to the edge of that 65-foot buffer.
Okay.
On the other sides of the property, the eastern and southern sides of this property that back up to Mayfair, Brugger's, and the Butler building here, there are no setbacks or buffers. They're inside of a mixed-use overlay district, so there technically is not a requirement for a buffer on those boundaries on the other side.
Okay. So how much more, I guess I'm still a little confused, so how much more would providing a 60-foot setback on the north line and a 70 on the west line provide versus if the applicant were to build something today? So let's say the applicant wanted to come in and build anything that's allowed in a commercial district today. What's the difference that they would, I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, is what are they actually getting from that second zoning condition that they wouldn't get were the applicant to develop today?
Okay? We'll go to a special reserve slide.
He's ahead of you.
This may look familiar from your staff report. This is a map that shows if there was no rezoning, you just had the existing zoning today, and the applicant wanted to build something commercial, shop, restaurant, retail store, on the currently zoned GC site, he would need a 65-foot buffer against the single-family neighborhood. There would be a 10-foot setbacks. I'm looking at the site, it's fully wooded off of that. And you would have this little R12 remnant. It's a little part of that lot here that would still, it would just be sticking out there. And it would be unusable. You could not use it for the shop, for any shopping, retail, or other use, and it's too small to put a house on. It would just be a remnant that would sit there. If the site is rezoned as proposed, and the whole thing is general commercial, it gets, again, you have the same 65-foot buffer, and the same 10-foot buffer off. That little R12 remnant has now converted to be usable general commercial land. So it's that's the difference right here.
Okay, gotcha.
Commercial zoning.
That's
And it's a little less than 2,000 square feet.
Okay, I understand. That's a very easy way to
Yeah.
conceptualize it. Thank you.
Can I clarify one thing now?
You want to ask the applicant to clarify?
Up to the board.
Sure.
That additional setback was not for retail, is for O&I. O&I is where you see the biggest benefit. In other words, for retail, that's correct. If it's O&I, now it's only 40 and 10, 50 foot. And I'm given 60 foot and 70 foot.
Okay.
That's what I want to clarify.
That's
Okay.
fair.
I follow what you're saying.
Right. So if it is the,
So were it to develop
Office
O&I, you get a
condition.
big bang for your
Yeah.
buck, so to speak.
yeah, so if it's an office condition under existing zoning, you'd only have to have a 40-foot buffer next to the neighborhood.
Okay.
And the R12 remnant would be bigger, but still unusable. And that's where Mr. Ledson has offered bigger setbacks. So with an office buffer, you'd have a 40-foot buffer, but then you get more setback for any building.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, I'm curious, there's an indent or inset area, it looks like the property line is indented. What's that indent? Is it right-of-way?
Oh, right.
On Southwest Maynard Road?
Yep, that looks like exactly what it is.
It's dedicated right-of-way?
That would be, I may ask Ken for confirmation, but when the Southwest Maynard Road widening happened about a decade ago, because we used to be a 3-lane road section, and it was a major widening project about a decade ago to take it to a 5-lane section. The town acquired right-of-way, and the signal light was added. My suspicion is that that was probably acquired as part of the road project at that time.
Okay.
Is that it? Rita?
I don't have any questions.
Mr. Ramage, could you please put back that buffer slide you had? That was a good secret slide.
The one we had just in case. This is straight from your staff report.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've seen it before, but it's helpful. Thank you. So there's a little jewel in this neighborhood with the Rose Street Park. It's actually quite nice. And it's a sort of a surprise to see that actually there in the neighborhood. I'm sure the neighbors appreciate that. One side of it has got a sort of a concrete wall, which is behind the grocery store in the Mayfair Plaza. Now with this proposed development, it looks like the buffering just for half of it is going to shrink down to as little as 30-some feet there. Is there some reason for why it just didn't cut across to 65 feet to give as much tree and buffering behind that park as the residential areas?
Right. And it has to do with the way the LDO is written. The size and opacity of a buffer depends on the two uses that are next to each other. So the biggest buffer we have is when you have a shopping retail use next to single-family detached lots. When you have a park, which is already trees and buffers, no one's living there, the size of the buffer under regulation drops to about 30 feet. Between the park and here. And the reason you see this little arc is because it's still 65 feet all the way from the corner of number 115 Rose Street. And it comes back like that.
So there wasn't a LDO requirement to keep that as a straight line. There's a little curve because it's a transition, but it's transitioning down to the LDO required 30 feet on the back of the park, which is, I think, is the children's playground, is in the part of the park on that side of the
And you'll also
the
notice
street.
that Carolina Pottery, that parcel has there's that odd, if you've ever driven back behind the shopping center, the delivery drive aisles come down the length behind the Food Lion and Carolina Pottery. And their property actually comes all the way down and makes that little notch there. And I'm not sure in the future, should Carolina Pottery redevelop, or when this site finally gets a site plan, I presume Mr. Dunn and staff would be looking at any other points of connectivity and how to mitigate impact.
It's not a given that there would be an access point to that service lane there behind the Food Lion to this property, is there? We talked about the Gordon Street access, which was a maybe during site planning, but on the opposite side, that brick wall is only along the Rose Street Park area. There's no real brick wall right beyond the Food Lion.
Driveway connectivity usually in parking lots handled a little differently than street connectivity.
Yeah, so would there be access into that service drive there behind the Food Lion?
I think the LDO would generally be supportive of a cross connection there, but it would depend on the two different uses. But generally, it would, given the information we've got right now.
Okay. That's the only questions I had.
Am I correct in what I'm saying, that if we didn't approve tonight and he built as is, the chance of Gordon Street going through would still be a probability, and nothing would change with the park? Everything would stay the same no matter what?
Correct, right. Because the existing, if it was sold, if that lot was sold for a house, you would somehow have to get Gordon Street to the house. If the GC part the general commercial part today comes all the way right up to the property line on the dead end of Gordon Street. So if you fit in a commercial use tomorrow, it would raise the exact same issues. So the access issues are the same with and without the rezoning.
May I see super secret slide number 2?
The one where I did office?
Yes.
Okay, the office example. Oops. That was a.
I thought for a minute we'd have to go into closed session.
It's so secret. I don't know what I mistyped, but that was.
My question, and the applicant may be able to help too, when we heard of how this would be a greater zoning condition, the 60-foot setback, and I'm only concerned with the Gordon Street property. The other property makes perfect sense. But when we saw the list of zoning conditions, it said on I believe, the 203 Gordon Street property, there's going to be
Right.
the additional setback.
Right,
So, and that's what I believe I see here in gray.
right.
That
That's
that
the
setback exists only, if we look, it only exists south of the 201 parcel. When you get to the 119 and 115 parcels, we do not have that 60-foot setback. Is that correct? We go back to regular setbacks.
Here's a.
Oh, yes, yes, absolutely.
So here are the setbacks all.
So, again, this is where I don't know how this happened. I'm going to say it must fall on my shoulders, but in number 115 and 119 are also supposed to have the 60-foot setback. And that's not on there. And that was, again, maybe I should have caught that, but I thought I'd stated that on there. So, and also I wanted to make one other point on the connectivity, because I wanted to put this as a condition also.
I'm afraid we didn't ask you about that.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was going by the other,
Yeah, if you want to ask them, go right ahead. But
I'm good with staff's answer.
Victor.
But I'm sorry.
Since I opened the can of worms, please, go ahead.
Okay.
And the con-
You were wondering on the
east.
connectivity into the
To the
rear
east, to
of
Mayfair Plaza.
Food Lion?
Yeah, into the.
Yeah, it's been my intention to always have a connectivity to it, and I wanted to put that as a condition, and I was told I could not because it's already set in the plans that will be connected to it. So if there's a way I can put that in there, I'm happy to do it, because it really does need to interconnect. And I say that because some of the town council members, that's real important to them that they have a stoplight to do a turnaround. But my understanding is I can't put that in as a condition, because I'm more than happy to do that. And one last thing on the Gordon Street. It stops about 15 feet before the end of the property lines. It does not go to the end. And I will tell you, the neighbors that's their biggest uproar, is that connectivity from Gordon Street. But there's nothing I can do on that.
Well, let me go back to my question about the setbacks, if I can. The original thing we were told is there's going to be some zoning conditions applied to these two small properties, and because of the new ordinance, we can now make these zoning conditions run with the rest of this larger parcel. Yet the zoning condition for 60-foot setback does not seem to apply to the northern part of the larger parcel. That's, I'm trying to just get my head wrapped around what exactly is in the zoning condition that we're voting on versus what your intention was to do.
What you have in the paperwork and what is as part of the case tonight is what you see here on this slide. It's a
Okay.
60-foot
Perfect.
northern setback at 202, and it would be a 50-foot setback, according to this condition here, for the big property at 128 Southwest Maynard.
Excellent.
If Mr. Ledson has said that that's an oversight, we'll work with him to
make it 60 foot.
Update the zoning conditions and say, for 128 Southwest Maynard, set 50 foot next to the western lots and 60 feet next to the northern lots. We can work with you if that was your intent.
No, it is specifically for 119 and 115.
And 115,
to go 60 foot.
okay.
Yeah, that was always my intention. So,
Okay.
glad we
That
clarified.
clears it up perfectly. Thank you
Very
very
good.
much.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the staff or for the applicant? Yes?
I'm just curious, on Gordon Street, you're talking about it stops short of the property line.
It does.
Is it dedicated right-of-way?
Yes,
Okay, so it's just not paved, but there's right-of-way there.
correct.
Okay, so it can be paved and completed. Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions? Does anyone have a motion that they might be willing to put forward?
I would be glad to do a motion then. I would move that the board forward case number 17 REZ 19 to the town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
Have we a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? on
Just
this?
a couple of words. I know there's a lot of questions with this, and to me, you know, no offense, it's not, this is a very difficult lot. It's not a good lot. And to me, what's being proposed here squares it up, and it makes it a little bit more useful. It's a 40-year infield. It would be awesome if something was going to happen to tie all these things together, but based on what we've heard, doesn't look like that's going to happen. And I think if you just look at the question that's before us tonight, I do believe that that you know the buffers will protect the neighborhood, and that this really meets the criteria that we're here really to look at versus a bigger picture.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, this is probably a terrible place to try to utilize for commercial were it not part of a larger redevelopment. And I'm a bit disappointed that we don't or have the potential for that redevelopment, but completely understand, you know, the pieces of play there. I will commend the applicant, and I remember the case before us 2 years ago, and definitely echoed more in this one, that the applicant's really working with the neighbors to kind of craft something that really fits what the neighbors want. And I really see this as something that would definitely benefit the neighborhood, benefit the neighbors, and really fit nicely in this area. So definitely in support of it.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to say?
This seems to be a perfect example of difficult infill cases. This is the sort of case that we're seeing more and more and more. And like everyone has said, we'd love to see a comprehensive redevelopment of this entire commercial area. But that's not before us and doesn't seem like it's in the works. So I would support this.
Anyone else? And I would ask that if you plan to vote against it, I'd like to hear from you.
I'm not going to vote against it. I think, echoing what a few other folks said, it's a difficult lot. I hope that this cleans it up so that it's more serviceable. You know, as we look at these in the heritage area, initially I had some heartburn over giving up a residential lot, R12, seeing the migration from residential to commercial, but also recognizing that that's a lot that hasn't been developed and is not easily developed because the road doesn't go in front of it. I mean, you have to. That's a whole nother piece of work, and so I can see that. And the value of trying to make this site so it's a little bit more usable and the neighbors get the buffer, the useful buffer out of it.
And over here?
I agree with the comments that have been made so far, especially Dan's.
Mr. Ramage, could you please put the uses that are crossed out,
yes.
that slide? Just to refresh here on that.
And there is an attachment to your staff report that has the full list, the comprehensive list of the district and what's allowed, but this would be the highlights.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Nothing? Out of sheer coincidence, I'm sure, at our work session just last week, we talked about zoning conditions and we talked about the Cary Community Plan. And the Cary Community Plan, I mean, we spent a lot of years working that thing out, and here it is in force. I mean, as we review the case, whether or not it's consistent, as staff has, you know, we see all the things that have to go into trying to make something work now in an infill project around here. Then on top of that, And I know, before I say anything else, I am voting on the case before me tonight and nothing more. But to hear an applicant working so hard with the neighbors, like you said, to put conditions forward, to put zoning conditions forward that help make everything work, even in the previous time, and for, you know, and that was what that was, and that's, you know, topic for another time. But to see that, I mean, to see a lot of interaction, to see the fact that there's nobody here complaining about this, I mean, between that and the community plan, this is how this thing is supposed to work. And so I'm happy to get behind it. With that in mind, of all those in favor of this rezoning, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed at all, say no. That motion carries unanimously. We only have one case remaining, and that is some LDO amendments. That's Act 04, as we call them now. And Ms. Schumacher-Georgopoulos is here for us. Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening. As you noted, the final item presented for your consideration tonight is Act 4 of the Land Development Ordinance Amendments. Act 4 includes 2 items. Item A is to establish new uses for breweries, distilleries, and wineries. And item B includes 4 minor amendments. Just a reminder, these items had been previously reviewed with the Planning and Zoning Board at your work session on January 29th. And the public hearing for these items was held at the regular Town Council meeting on February 22nd. We bring tonight the first amendment to add breweries, distilleries, and wineries to the Land Development Ordinance. From here on out, I'm going to refer to all 3 of these as breweries or businesses because I can't say those 3 things 3 times fast. But we bring this item to you now because these industries are increasingly important to our state's economy. North Carolina has seen its continued growth in the craft beer industry, and today we have over 300 craft beer breweries across the state. According to information from 2016, North Carolina was not only the top 10 states for breweries, but also for economic impact and number of barrels produced per year. In addition to breweries, North Carolina also ranks 10th in both grape and wine production in the United States. And so Cary has contributed to these numbers with the opening of 3 breweries in the last 4 years, and due to the success of our local breweries, their desire to expand, and inquiries from potential new breweries, we felt it was time to create a use specific to these businesses. The LDO today does not currently recognize these businesses as distinct uses within the ordinance. Cary's 3 existing breweries and the winery are currently classified as light manufacturing uses within the LDO and are limited to a business model and the locations of only a light manufacturing use. Through a collaborative process of working with our local breweries and the winery and even future business owners, we bring forward this ordinance amendment. The proposed amendment provides definitions for new uses and allows these businesses to also be located in commercial areas. Specific standards for allowances of tasting rooms and parking requirements are also included within the amendment. And so ultimately, we looked to this proposed amendment to create more opportunities like this, which meets the intent of expanding these uses based on the downtown planning area of the Cary Community Plan, and additionally allowing businesses to include restaurants and tasting rooms in commercial districts to contribute to the intent of nurturing and growing small businesses and fostering sustained prosperity to keep Cary great. At the public hearing, there were no speakers on this topic and there were no concerns that were raised by council. Item B for your consideration tonight includes 4 minor amendments. The first item is to update terminology to reflect current administrative names and processes related to historic preservation. The second item is to add the criteria, advance the goals and purpose of the LDO for any buffer reduction requiring council approval. The third amendment would allow voluntary dedication of right-of-way for the otherwise exempt subdivision without triggering a requirement for improvements such as road widening. And the fourth item clarifies the process of parkland dedication in Chatham County. Again, there were no speakers on these topics and there were no concerns raised by Town Council at the meeting, at the public hearing on February 22nd. So staff recommends approval of the proposed amendment, and we are happy to answer any questions as part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, who's the first who wants to ask for a site visit on the brewery deal?
All right, let's go.
Does anyone have any questions of the staff on these amendments? If not, I suppose we can take item A and B together. I'll check my little cheat sheet, but I'm sure I can.
Refer to them, what is Act 04 together?
Act 04, items A and B. So if someone wants to make a motion to approve those, we can move forward.
I'll be glad to make a motion. I move that the board forward LDO amendment, Act 04 A and B to town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any other discussion on this motion at all? No? Well, then all those in favor of approving Act 04 A and B, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say no. That motion also carries unanimously. Have we any new business or any reasons to go into a closed session? If not, we know what comes next.
I'll make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. We are adjourned. Good evening.
What's the-
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.